fish, which I got to tell you is one of the things, Rhino and Ben, I miss the most about living in the South is good fried catfish. I live here in Toledo. I'm doing the show on SuperTalk Mississippi from Ohio today. I just happened to see a place down the street that looks like a nice southern, and I mean this in the best way, a hole in the wall. And out front, it just got a sign that says fried catfish. So I'm dying to go in there and try it and see if it lives up to the hype. But I do miss that. Ben Milam from SuperTalk Mississippi News is joining us now on middays. It's nice to meet you, Ben. Thanks for sitting in for a few minutes.
Yeah, you too, Scott. Good to be here, man.
So one of the stories I saw this week is this whole debate that's happening in Clarksdale over an editorial in that city's newspaper that's kind of resulted in a lawsuit. Tell me what's happening with this and why it's a big deal.
Yeah, so I think at this point, a lot of people have probably heard about this because there was really a national response to really this whole sequence of events, but it started early February 8th to be exact. An editorial was published by the Clarksdale Press Register, local newspaper there in Clarksdale. And it was a critical editorial because the city of Clarksdale, they met regarding it. They had a special meeting about a tax resolution on sin tax, which would have I believe it was a 2% tax on tobacco and
all the fun stuff,
alcohol, right? And the sinful stuff too.
Those of us who have vices have to pay a little bit more than everybody else.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And the editorial basically was critical because the city did not notify media in accordance with the open meeting statute. And that was basically the gist of it. The title of it was "Secrecy, Deception Erode Public Trust." And so that was the basic drive of this article. The city responded by filing a lawsuit based on citing libel. And really, when this really started to kind of kick up, the dust storm really started spinning, is when a Hinds County judge made an order based on that lawsuit, in adherence with that lawsuit, following the request of the city to demand that the Press Register remove this editorial, which again was opinion. It was listed as such, saying that it was libelous and it was untrue. That's where the larger concern of this came from, and when the national response started was citing First Amendment. Obviously, that's what people went to, and I think a clear breach of that is what people were decrying based on this judge's order. And Wyatt Emmerich, the owner of this newspaper, pointed out that this was not this order was not put down or executed by a local judge. It was a judge in central Mississippi, away from the Delta, where this was going on in Clarksdale. And so it was all just kind of a really fuzzy situation and kind of shaky legal ground that this order was made. And this week, a couple of days later, the city removed this lawsuit. And of course, the judge's order was still upheld because that had been initiated, and then yesterday we got word that the judge's order had been removed. So it all felt like it was because of this national response and First Amendment concerns that the city backed down, the judge backed down from her order, the Hinds County judge. And as of right now, we haven't heard of whether they're going to put this editorial back up. But, in the day and age of when
the damage is done at this point.
Yeah, you're right. And I think a lot of people, the editorial has been put out there online, and so it's down, quote unquote. But I think a lot more people have read it now than they would have otherwise.
Right. Probably this whole thing probably drew much more attention to the topic than
much more
than ever would have been raised if they just let it alone. And I got to tell you, from the city's perspective, it's probably not the best way to garner favorable news coverage by suing the local newspaper. That might backfire on them at some point.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say it did, Scott.
On a local level, you've got some municipal elections coming up soon, and the deadline is coming up to register as a voter for that.
That's right, Monday. Yeah, and spoke with Secretary of State Michael Watson about this early this week, late last week. But we talked about the fact that obviously the national attention, local attention, state attention was on the federal presidential election last year, and we had some important statewide races as well. But you kind of you have a little bit of election exhaustion, I think, following such an intense cycle like that. And so we really want to make sure people know that the deadline to register to vote for municipal primary elections, which are on April 1st in Mississippi this year, so just over a month away. And that's one of the things that Secretary Watson said. You can make the argument that those are more important elections in terms of how it's going to directly affect you as a Mississippian in your specific municipality. Are those local elections, the people that have the power to raise and lower your local taxes that are going to affect you every single day? And so Monday, March 3rd, if you have not registered to vote, put it on your calendar. Obviously, you've got time today or all day Monday to get it done, but that's a very important thing to do.
These local municipal elections are so important because they do affect our lives directly every day. And in an off-cycle year, in an off-cycle election, I don't know, I should have looked up some of the numbers for Mississippi, but turnout is always just absolutely abysmal. I've seen some off-cycle elections here in Toledo, Ohio, where I live now, where we've seen voter turnout under 13% for local elections, which is embarrassing.
Yep, and I think that rings true in Mississippi as well. And I think especially after the year following a really big intent, you can follow the 2016 election, or I guess maybe the last two presidential elections or last three. That following year, the municipal turnout is drastically lower than it typically is, or really needs to be, frankly. And I actually think there's a connection between these two stories we're talking about. I think local and personal, we kind of miss that these days. With the firestorm that is social media, we can focus on who's in the White House and who is on Capitol Hill and what's happening in California or wherever else, way off. And we can kind of miss what we really need to focus on and what really matters in some ways is at the local level, be that the media or the city council or who's up for these municipal elections, mayoral or otherwise. It is as important as ever and maybe more important than it ever has been.
Ben, this story, and I don't know why this came up in my feed, but as I've been getting ready for it today, this is such a small story, but I'll tell you why it caught my attention. There is an initiative in Jackson to plant trees. Now, normally this is not anything I would ever talk about, but I love this idea because 500 trees being planted in Midtown Jackson from the Fruit Tree Planting Foundation, the Arbor Day Foundation, and Amazon, which I love this because here's why this story caught my attention. We're going through the same thing in Toledo, Ohio, where I am now, with 907 trees that are supposed to be planted in the city at a cost of, get this, $6 million to plant 900 trees. But the money, and the reason why it's costing $6 million is because the money was initially coming from a federal grant, which now under the Trump administration and under DOGE looks like it's going to be cut, which is good. And I'm not against beautifying a city or the benefit that trees bring to the environment. They're excellent for air quality, property values, urban aesthetics, all of those things. But $6 million, I did the math when I was talking about this locally. I think that came down to like $7,000 a tree or some ridiculous number. And now because that grant may be gone, they're going to increase property taxes in Toledo to plant the trees. Why? I clipped this article to send to Mayor Capscavage here in Toledo and say, look, you got 500 trees that are being done with a local foundation through local coordinations, through donations. We don't need to raise taxes to plant some trees.
Yeah, hey, if you give me $6 million, I'll go find 900 seeds or little trees, and I'll plant them around wherever you want. But this is, it's, again, local level, people who care about their community doing something that directly affects quality of living in Jackson, Mississippi. You love to see it.
Yeah. State Senator David Blunt will join me in just a minute. We'll talk more about online sports wagering in the state of Mississippi. That's Ben Milam from SuperTalk Mississippi News in the Element Wealth Studios. Middays with Gerard Gibbert. My name is Scott Sands. It's great to be on the radio back home in Mississippi, and I'd love to hear from you as well on the C Spire text line, 601-879-4395. Go ahead and chime in with your thoughts on whether or not online sports wagering should be legal in Mississippi.